Death has a peculiar way of arriving when you least expect it. For me, it came on an October night as autumn leaves danced outside my window at St. Mary's Hospital. The heart monitor ticked in a regular rhythm, and the air conditioner hummed with a monotony that seemed to mock my last conscious moments. It was not a heroic death, nor was it even particularly dignified. It was the result of years of poor decisions, of lost battles against my own demons, and of an addiction that had finally won the war. My name is Isabella Martinez, and this is the story of how I met Marilyn Monroe in hell. Not the hell of flames and sulfur that we have been sold for centuries, but a much more personal and terrifying one, the hell of eternal regrets. When my heart stopped beating at 3:42 a.m., there was no bright light at the end of a tunnel. There were no angels singing or deceased relatives waiting for me with open arms. Instead, I found myself falling into a void that seemed to have no end, a space between dimensions where time lost all meaning. The air was thick, as if I were breathing liquid lead, and every movement required monumental effort. The first few moments in this place were disconcerting. The space around me seemed to be constantly changing, as if I were inside a giant kaleidoscope. The walls, if you could even call them that, were covered in mirrors that did not reflect my current image, but fragments of my life. Each mirror showed a different moment, a crucial decision, a missed opportunity. It was like being trapped in a gallery of my own failures. In one mirror, I saw the moment I turned down the college scholarship that could have changed my life. In another, I witnessed the last conversation with my mother before she passed away, when I was too drugged to comprehend the gravity of her words. Each reflection was a stinging reminder of the choices that had brought me to this place. That's when I saw her for the first time. At first, I thought it was another illusion, another trick of this place to torture me. But there was something different about her, something that stood out among the shadows and distorted reflections. Marilyn Monroe, the icon of the 20th century, was sitting at what looked like an old dressing room vanity, staring into a mirror that gave no reflection. This was not the Marilyn the world remembered. She was not the movie goddess in her white dress billowing over a subway grate, nor the seductive singer whispering, "Happy birthday, Mr. President." This Marilyn seemed more real, more human, and paradoxically, more beautiful in her vulnerability. Her famous platinum hair had lost some of its shine, and her eyes, though still magnetic, carried the weight of 1,000 untold secrets. "I've been waiting for you," he said without turning around, his voice a whisper that somehow filled the entire space. "Everyone gets here eventually, all of us who mistake the brightness for true light." I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. How could Marilyn Monroe be waiting for me? And what did she mean when she said we were all coming here? "Come here," she continued, gesturing to a stool that appeared next to her. "We have much to talk about, and while time here means nothing, there are truths that need to be told." With shaky steps, I walked over and sat down next to her. Up close, I could see the worry lines on her face, the little imperfections that Hollywood never allowed the world to see. She was beautiful in a different, more authentic way. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, finally turning to look directly at me. "Why did I die?" I replied in a small voice. Marilyn gave a soft laugh, but there was no joy in it. "Dying is just the ticket to entry, darling. You're here because, like me, you chose to live on the surface of things. You preferred applause to true love, superficial admiration to genuine respect, temporary escape to lasting peace." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. Of course, my whole life had been a constant search for external validation. Drugs were just the latest resort in a long line of attempts to fill a void that seemed bottomless. "But you were Marilyn Monroe," I protested weakly. "You had everything anyone could want." "Everything," she replied with a sad smile. "I had fame, yes. I had men who wanted me and women who wanted to be like me. I had enough money to buy anything I wanted. But you know what I didn't have? Peace. Authenticity. The ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back at me." Marilyn stood up from the vanity table and began to pace the shadowy space, her heels clicking with an eternal echo. "Do you know what my biggest mistake was, Isabella? It wasn't taking too many pills that night. It wasn't trusting the wrong people. My biggest mistake was believing I could fill the emptiness in my soul with the admiring glances of strangers. She stopped in front of one of the infinity mirrors, and for the first time, I saw her reflection change. She was no longer the glamorous Marilyn of the lights, but Norma Jean Baker, the girl who grew up in orphanages, dreaming of being loved. Every time I transformed into Marilyn, I lost a little more of Norma Jean. Every time I smiled for the cameras, I buried my true feelings deeper. Her words echoed through me like the bells of an abandoned church. I, too, had been burying my true self under layers of fake smiles and chemicals. Each prick of the needle had been a desperate attempt to silence the voice of my authenticity. But this place, Marilyn continued, gesturing toward the surrounding darkness, is not a punishment. It is an opportunity. One last chance to face our truths, to acknowledge our mistakes, to understand that true beauty is not in being perfect, but in being authentic. The mirrors began to shift, now showing different moments in her life. I saw her as a young model, full of hopes and dreams. I saw her at her first auditions, determined to prove she was more than just a pretty face. I saw her in her darkest moments, battling her own demons. Every decision we make creates an echo in the universe, she explained as we walked together down that hallway of memories. Every time we choose the mask over the truth, every time we choose applause over self-love, we create a crack in our soul. And those cracks, Isabella, are what bring us here. I stood in front of a mirror that showed my own past. I saw the girl I used to be, full of dreams and possibilities. I saw the exact moment I started to lose myself, when I decided that being myself wasn't enough. Is there a way to fix this? I asked, my voice shaking. Marilyn smiled, but this time her smile reached her eyes. There's always a way. That's why we're here. It's not an ending, it's an intermission. A space between acts where we can rewrite our script. He stepped closer to me and took my hands in his. They were warm, surprisingly real for someone who had been in this place for so long. The real tragedy is not making mistakes, Isabella. The real tragedy is not learning from them. I never had the chance to correct my course, but you still can. The mirrors began to vibrate, as if responding to her words. The images became sharper, more vibrant. I saw moments of my life I had forgotten. Laughter with friends, hugs from my mother, small triumphs I had minimized in my pursuit of something bigger. The secret, Marilyn continued, isn't in being perfect. It's in accepting your imperfection, in embracing your scars as part of your story, in understanding that every mistake, every fall, every moment of pain has brought you exactly where you needed to be. As he spoke, the space around us began to transform. The darkness became less dense, less threatening. Shadows began to recede, revealing flashes of light I hadn't noticed before. Do you see those lights? Marilyn asked, pointing to the small bright spots now surrounding us. They're the people who love you, the ones who have been trying to reach you through the fog of your addiction, the ones who never gave up on you, even when you gave up on yourself. Each point of light seemed to pulse with a life of its own, like stars in a night sky. I recognized some. My mother, my childhood best friend, my old art teacher who always believed in my talent. People I had pushed away in my spiral of self-destruction. True love, Marilyn said softly, isn't like the movies. It's not dramatic or perfect. It's persistent. It's the kind of love that waits patiently while you fight your demons. It's the kind of love that sees your light even when you can only see darkness. He walked over to one of the mirrors and ran his hand across the surface. The image changed, now showing my body in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and worried people. Look how much love there is in that room. Look how many people are praying for you, hoping you'll find your way back. Tears began to run down my cheeks as I took in the scene. My little sister holding my hand, whispering words of encouragement. My father, the stoic man who never showed emotion, silently crying in the corner. Even my ex-boyfriend, whom I had hurt so many times, was there waiting. Fame, money, drugs, they're all just distractions, Marilyn continued. We try to fill our emptiness with shiny things, But the real treasure was always in the little things. In the genuine smiles. In the hugs that last a second longer than necessary. In the people who stay when everyone else is gone. The mirrors began to show new images, but these were different. They weren't memories, but possibilities. I saw myself sober, helping other addicts find their way. I saw myself painting again, something I'd given up years ago. I saw myself laughing, loving, living. That's your potential future, Marilyn explained. But only you can choose it. Only you can decide if you want to remain a character in someone else's story, or if you're ready to be the protagonist of your own story. She stopped in front of a particularly large mirror and made me look at it. For the first time since I came to this place, I saw my true reflection. Not the mask I had been wearing, not the addict I had become, but the real me. The person who had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. Life isn't about avoiding falls, Marilyn said with a wisdom that can only come from experiencing the deepest pain. It's about learning to get up. It's about finding the beauty in the scars. It's about turning your pain into power. I felt something shift inside me, as if a door that had been closed for years had finally opened, letting in a light I had forgotten existed. How? I asked. How do I start over? Marilyn smiled, and for a moment, I saw in her all the beauty and wisdom that Hollywood had never been able to capture. You start by recognizing that every moment is an opportunity to choose anew. You start by forgiving yourself. You start by remembering that your worth is not in what others see in you, but in what you see in yourself. The mirrors began to vibrate more intensely, and I felt something was changing. The air became lighter, more breathable. What's going on? I asked, feeling a strange urgency in my chest. You're ready, Marilyn replied. Ready to come back. To have your second chance. She came over and hugged me. And in that hug, I felt all the love and understanding I've been looking for in all the wrong places. Don't make my mistakes, Isabella. Don't let the world convince you that you need to be someone else to be worthy. The lights began to flicker, and I felt like I was fading away. Will I ever see you again? I asked, clinging to his last words. You'll see me every time you choose truth over the mask, she replied. Every time you dare to be authentic in a world that prefers copies. Every time you help someone else find their light. The world around me began to dissolve, but Marilyn's last words remained etched in my soul. Remember, the real hell is not this place. The real hell is living a life pretending to be someone you're not. Freedom is in authenticity. I woke up in the hospital room with a deep gasp, as if I had been holding my breath for days. The machines around me began to beep with renewed intensity, and soon the room was filled with doctors and nurses. Their voices sounded distant, as if they were coming through a long tunnel, but there was a clarity in my mind that I hadn't experienced in years. He's responding, I heard someone say. His vital signs are stabilizing. My sister, who had been asleep in a chair next to my bed, woke with a start. Her eyes, swollen from crying, lit up when she saw me conscious. Isabella! Oh my God, Isabella! I wanted to tell him everything. About Marilyn, about the mirrors, about the truths I had discovered in that space between life and death. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, the tears began to flow, tears of understanding, of regret, of hope. The next few days were a whirlwind of medical examinations, specialist visits, and sessions with psychologists. Everyone wanted to know what had changed, what had caused this sudden will to live in someone who had been so close to giving up. How could they explain to them that he had needed to die in order to learn to live? Rehab was tough. Withdrawal symptoms shook my body with a violence that would have been unbearable if it weren't for Marilyn's words echoing in my mind. True strength is not in not falling, but in getting up every time you fall. During the toughest nights, when the craving for drugs threatened to consume me, I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror and practice what I had learned in that place. I would look into my eyes, really look at myself, and search for the real Isabella behind all the masks I had worn for years. I began to keep a journal, documenting not only my recovery process, but also every detail of my encounter with Marilyn. The pages quickly filled with her words of wisdom, with the truths she had shared, with the lessons I had learned in that space between dimensions. As the months passed, something extraordinary began to happen. People began to notice, not just my sobriety, but something deeper, an authenticity that radiated from me like a soft but steady light. The same mirrors that had previously shown me a distorted image of myself now reflected someone who had finally found herself. I started painting again. At first, my hands shook so much I could barely hold the brush, but I persisted. Each stroke was a form of therapy, each color an expression of the emotions I had repressed for so long. My first painting was a portrait of Marilyn, not the glamorous image the world knew, but the real woman I had met in hell. Her eyes on the canvas held all the wisdom and pain she had shared with me. The painting caught the eye of my rehab group. Other recovering addicts were strangely drawn to it, as if they could see in those painted eyes a reflection of their own struggle. I began to share my story, first in halting whispers, then in an increasingly louder voice. The real hell, he told them, quoting Marilyn, is not a place of fire and brimstone. It's living a life pretending to be someone you're not. My story began to circulate in recovery circles. Some dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by the overdose, others as an elaborate metaphor, but all found something in it that resonated with their own experience. The idea that our greatest demons are not the substances we consume, but the lies we tell ourselves. A year after my death, I organized an art show at a small community center. I called it Reflections of Hell, a journey toward authenticity. Each painting was a window into my experience, each piece a visual translation of the truths I had learned from Marilyn. On opening night, as I watched people move among my works, I noticed something extraordinary in every reflection, on every shiny surface in the gallery. I thought I saw glimpses of a familiar smile, a knowing wink from eyes that had seen too much and yet had found the strength to share their wisdom. My father, who had kept his distance for years because of my addiction, came over with tears in his eyes. "I finally see my daughter," he said, hugging me. "The real Isabella has returned." I began speaking at rehab centers, sharing not only my story of addiction and recovery, but the deep truths about authenticity and self-love that I had learned from my encounter with Marilyn. Every time I spoke, I felt her presence, as if she were there, nodding in approval. True beauty, I told my audiences, is not in being perfect. It's in being real, in embracing every scar, every mistake, every moment of pain as part of our story. Because it's those imperfections that make us unique, that make us human. My life became a mission to help others find their own light, to recognize their worth beyond the masks the world had made them wear. Each person I helped find their way to recovery was an echo of Marilyn's words. True love begins with loving yourself. 5 years after my encounter with Marilyn, I published a book titled Conversations in Hell: What Marilyn Monroe Taught Me About Life, Death, and Authenticity. It became an underground phenomenon, striking a chord with people struggling not only with addictions, but with any form of mask society had forced them to wear. One night, while I was signing copies of my book at a small bookstore, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story saved my life," she said. "It made me realize that I was not alone in my struggle to be authentic." At that moment, I remembered Marilyn's last words. "You will see me every time you choose the truth over the mask." And it was true. I saw her in every person who found the courage to be authentic, in every soul who dared to take off their masks and show their true face to the world. My encounter with Marilyn Monroe in hell was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new life, a life dedicated to truth, authenticity, and self-love. A life that was finally worth living. And so, what began as a near-death experience transformed into a life mission. My story resonated with people from all walks of life, not just those struggling with addiction, but anyone who felt the weight of societal expectations and the masks we are forced to wear. Lectures became seminars. Seminars became intensive weekend workshops where people could explore their own authenticity. I called the program the Monroe Method, Discovering Your True Self, after the woman who had shown me the way. In these workshops, I used mirrors as a therapeutic tool, a technique I had honed over the years. Participants confronted their own reflections as they shared their deepest truths, their darkest fears, their most cherished dreams. It was amazing to see how, just like in my experience in hell, the mirrors seemed to show not only the present, but also fragments of the past and glimpses of the potential future. The mirror, she explained, is not your enemy. It is a window to your soul, a portal to your deepest truth. When you learn to look at yourself with love, the reflection begins to change. One day, while I was conducting one of these workshops in Los Angeles, something extraordinary happened. An older woman approached me after the session. Her face seemed strangely familiar, although I couldn't place her. "I met Marilyn," he said without preamble. "The real Marilyn, not the character. She was my neighbor in the last months of her life." My heart skipped a beat. The woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor, shared with me details about Marilyn that had never appeared in any biography. Small gestures of kindness, moments of vulnerability, late-night conversations about the nature of love and authenticity. "What you describe in your book," Eleanor said with tears in her eyes, "is exactly the Marilyn I knew. A woman who deeply understood the price of fame and the value of authenticity, although she could never find her way back to herself." This unexpected validation gave me a new impetus. I began to dig deeper into Marilyn's life, not as a historical figure or a movie icon, but as a woman who had struggled with the same demons we all face. The need to be loved, the fear of not being enough, the constant battle between authenticity and social acceptance. I wrote a second book, The Mirror Circle, Conversations with Marilyn and Other Lost Souls, where I wove my experience with the stories of other people who had found their way back to themselves. The book became an international bestseller, translated into more than 20 languages. Letters began to pour in from all over the world. People who had found in my words an echo of their own struggle. Teenagers struggling with eating disorders, executives battling depression, artists lost in the maze of other people's expectations. They all found in Marilyn's story, and in my own journey, a beacon of hope. I established a nonprofit foundation, the Norma Jean Project, dedicated to helping people reconnect with their authenticity. We offered therapy scholarships, art therapy programs, and support groups for people in recovery from any type of addiction, whether to substances or external approval. One night, as I sat meditating in my studio, surrounded by the paintings I had made over the years, I had a profound realization. The hell I had visited was not a place of punishment, but a space of transformation. Every mirror, every painful reflection, every uncomfortable truth had been a gift, an opportunity for rebirth. I began to incorporate this understanding into my work. I no longer spoke of hell as a place of torment, but as a crucible where our masks melted away to reveal our true selves. People began to see their own struggles in a new light, not as punishments, but as invitations to transformation. My life became a living testament to Marilyn's words. Freedom is in authenticity. Every day was a new opportunity to honor that truth, to help others find their own path to the light. As the years went by, my work evolved. I began collaborating with educational institutions, developing programs to help young people maintain their authenticity in a world increasingly obsessed with appearances and digital validation. The Monroe Program for Youth Authenticity was implemented in schools across the country. At every lecture, every workshop, every one-on-one session, I shared not only my story, but also the lessons Marilyn had taught me in that strange encounter. Her wisdom, born of pain and experience, continued to touch lives decades after her death. The real miracle, I told my audiences, is not surviving hell. The real miracle is transforming that hell into a garden where others can find healing. And so, my life became a living testament that change is possible, that authenticity is the path to true freedom, and that even in our darkest moments, there is the possibility of redemption. Marilyn was right. I see it every time someone finds the courage to take off the mask, every time someone chooses truth over appearance, every time someone decides it's time to be real. And in every mirror, in every reflection, In every moment of shared truth, her smile continues to shine, reminding us that true paradise is not in being perfect, but in being authentically imperfect.